Hello and welcome to your August 10th daily briefing, and boy has this been an interesting few days. 2 days ago, President Trump signed his 4 executive orders addressing enhanced unemployment, payroll tax deferral, rent assistance, and the deferral of student loan payments. But with all this action comes some major concerns, and some of these major concerns that will be addressed in this video are: how effective are these executive orders going to be, really? What does this mean for the second stimulus check, and will there be a second stimulus package still? What does this mean for small business funding through the Paycheck Protection Program, because we've been hearing all about another round of PPP and we don't really know what might happen, what's going to go on with school funding, and just generally what can we expect next with all of this going on. So starting with the first question, how effective are these executive orders going to actually be? Well, the more information that comes out, the less confident in these orders I become. Really, 3 of the 4 sound much better on face value than they actually are. So let's quickly go through them. President Trump wanted to address the eviction issue in the country. And this is as the moratorium on rents expired a couple weeks ago. So one of the orders addresses exactly this, except not really. This executive order doesn't actually continue the moratorium on rental evictions. Instead, it calls upon the Secretary of Treasury and the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development to allocate any available federal funding towards financial assistance to renters and homeowners who were negatively impacted by the pandemic that we're in. This sounds kind of nice, but it's so far from definite and doesn't actually do anything by itself. It instead calls for something to be done. It's kind of like just like writing a memo to an assistant or something like that to look into something. That call for action could result in something beneficial, but we're just really not there yet. In my opinion, there's just nothing actually done yet. And then the next major issue is a payroll tax deferral. The president has been a huge fan of this for a long time, despite a lack of support from pretty much everyone else. And he signed in order to allow employers to defer employee-side payroll taxes with the chance of them being forgiven in the future. The chance. This one really concerns me because if it goes through, and we'll talk about if it can go through in just a minute here. So if it goes through, employees could just be stuck with a huge debt at the end of the year. So because of this, I personally would not opt to defer my employees' taxes unless something was actually written into law that it will be forgiven, because I think this is just going to put people in much more sticky situations at the end of the year, having to pay all that at once versus over each and every paycheck. As of right now, I just don't think it's a great idea. But now, will we even see this payroll tax deferral go through? And this is what Senator Ben Sasse has to say about it. The pen and phone theory of executive lawmaking is unconstitutional slop. President Obama didn't have the power to unilaterally write immigration law with DACA, and President Trump does not have the power to unilaterally rewrite the payroll tax law. So this is just one of the many people who feel the president might not or does not have the power to make these decisions. I just chose one quote from one person because this kind of just summarizes how most people feel about it. Most people don't like the idea, with the exception of Secretary Mnuchin said that he thinks it was a good move. There's very few people who are in support of it, but there are some. Many believe the best route still is through Congress, even though it might take much longer. Another person who is in favor of this, though, is White House economic advisor Larry Kudlow. And he believes that this is a great idea for workers, citing that it will be a massive wage increase for the 140 million working Americans, a wage increase that would result in about $1,200 by the end of the year. I'm not sure where this $1,200 magic number came from all of a sudden in 2020. We're all about $1,200. But here it is again, $1,200. He says people are going to save that much by the end of the year. But this is only a wage increase if it's forgiven. Otherwise, it's just a loan, I guess a no-interest loan. And I personally just don't trust it where it's at right now. Then moving on, the third executive order, of course, is enhanced unemployment. This continues unemployment at $400 per week instead of $600 where it was at and then expired a couple weeks back. But unfortunately, this is also filled with issues. It sounds okay on face value, but within the order are stipulations for states to foot 25% of the bill using the remaining $80 billion in funding for state and local governments from the CARES Act to do so. And on top of this, my former attorney friend Wayne brought up a really good point. The president outlined that 75% of the enhanced unemployment is to be paid federally, and it's supposed to be funded through a disaster relief fund via Homeland Security. But the thing is, this particular fund only has $44 billion in it. That sounds like a lot of money, but this program costs a ton of money and would be used up very quickly. So it's, at its best, is a very limited program, and we still would need some kind of intervention or solution through Congress, or I guess maybe some other kind of order. There needs to be an additional solution, even if this does go through at its best. Then finally, moving on to the last executive order, we have what seems to be the best of the four in terms of actual effectiveness: student loan deferral. So the CARES Act outlined a student loan deferral program, which has since expired, and then the president put in his executive order to address this issue. The order defers payments and interest on student loans through the end of the year, and does so without any tricky wording or half promises or just weird scenarios. Okay, now that we have all of that covered, let's talk about how this may affect the next stimulus check. I've seen so many of you in the comments think that the executive orders mean that the stimulus check simply isn't coming anymore, but I just don't think that's the case. Yes, he did not address the stimulus check in his executive orders, but it seems to me he didn't address it because there's kind of a consensus on both sides that we should have a stimulus check, so he kind of wanted to address things that there wasn't a consensus on. I think the odds are just as high as ever that we'll see another check. However, the timeline might have been pushed back, which is pretty frustrating in itself. Here's how I see it. The president made his move, which we're finding more and more doesn't do as much as it seemed it would, and legislators recognize this. They recognize that there still is major need for another stimulus package, and the debates aren't going to stop because, frankly, with the exception of student loan payments, pretty much none of our issues are solved right now. So let's just think in hypotheticals for a second and think about what both Democrats and Republicans absolutely agree on right now, or at least they agreed on last week. They all agree that there should be more small business funding, more funding for testing, and more funding for schools. In this hypothetical, all these agreed upon areas are yet to be addressed through the president's executive orders and will absolutely be in another stimulus package. So now that we've realized that another stimulus package is going to happen because these issues haven't been addressed, so it's going to happen 100% on some level, it's not a pipe dream. After that realization, it's much easier to kind of sit back and think, oh yeah, these executive orders don't really affect many of the issues Congress is dealing with, and we can go back to the assumption that a stimulus package will very likely contain another check to the people, school funding, and many other high-need areas. So now, what can we expect next? This is really the big question. We can first and foremost expect nonstop debate on the legality and effectiveness of the president's executive orders, but beyond this, we need to figure out what the Senate and the House's recess schedule is looking like. Both sides of Congress are technically on recess right now, but as of last week, the plan was to prepare for a vote this week. This fell through, of course. But we haven't had any updates as to whether there will be continued debates and negotiation this week or not, or if they're just going to continue with their recess and reconvene sometime in September. I hope dearly, for the sake of the people, that negotiations continue this week and next, because if we have to wait until the Senate and the House are back from recess, we're looking at a much, much longer timeline. The Senate, in that case, wouldn't get back until after the first week of September, which in the best case scenario would mean a stimulus package voted in by like the third week of September, and then checks delivered from mid-October to mid-November. I really don't want to think about checks being delivered that long from now, but I have to be realistic with all of you. I have to say it how I see it, and that is a possible scenario. So this is a scenario I really hope to not see. I'll be keeping my eye on this and hope to see in the next day or two some big headline that says negotiations resume on stimulus talks, and then I can let all of you know that, like, okay, things are still getting worked on and we'll all be all right. So this is all I have for today. Make sure you're subscribed to keep up to date with the latest. Check out some of my other videos if you're interested in business content. I can even offer a recommendation. If you're looking to get motivated a little bit, I have a video on my channel from last year. It's probably my favorite video of all time, which is kind of funny because it was one of my first videos. I cold approach 500 businesses over nearly 8 weeks and document the process and how it revolutionized my business. It was a really cool project and it's worth a watch. So feel free to check that out if you got 10 free minutes. Anyways, I'd like to thank you for watching and I hope you have a profitable day.